The sanctuary of First Baptist was eerily quiet when I slipped in through the side entrance that Tuesday evening. I'd forgotten my reading glasses during morning service, and Pastor Williams had given me his spare key years ago for situations just like this. What I didn't expect was to hear my sister Margaret's voice echoing from his office, speaking in those hushed, concerned tones that immediately made my stomach clench. "And I'm just so worried about Caroline," she was saying. "The drinking has gotten so much worse since David passed. I found empty bottles hidden in her garage, and last week she could barely stand straight at our mother's birthday dinner." My hand froze on the door handle. My husband David had been gone for 8 months now, and yes, I'd been struggling, but not with alcohol. I maybe had a glass of wine with dinner twice a week. The trembling that started in my fingers wasn't from withdrawal. It was from the shock of hearing my own sister fabricating an addiction I didn't have. "Have you considered an intervention, Margaret?" Pastor Williams asked gently. "That's exactly why I'm here. I think we need the church family support. Caroline has always been so proud. She'll never admit she needs help unless we all come together." The sanctuary suddenly felt suffocating. My chest tightened as I realized that my sister, the woman I'd helped raise after our father died, who I'd lent $15,000 to just last year when her business was failing, was systematically destroying my reputation in the one place I felt most at home. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it 3 rooms away. But Margaret wasn't finished. "I've already spoken with the ladies' prayer circle," she continued. "They're planning to start a special prayer chain for Caroline's healing, and I thought maybe we could organize some kind of support group for families dealing with addiction. You won't believe what happened to me, so please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what country you're watching from, because I have a feeling family betrayal is universal. My name is Caroline Bailey, I'm 57 years old, and I never imagined that grief could make you a target in your own family. For 23 years, I'd been married to David, a gentleman who coached Little League and never missed a Sunday service. We'd built a quiet, stable life together, no children of our own, but deeply involved in our church community and always there for family when they needed us. Margaret is my younger sister by 4 years, and I'd always been protective of her. When her graphic design business started failing 2 years ago, David and I didn't hesitate to loan her the money to keep her afloat. When her husband left her last spring, I was the one sitting in her kitchen at 2 a.m., helping her figure out how to manage as a single mother to teenage twins. But since David's sudden heart attack, something had shifted between us. At first, I thought it was just her awkward way of trying to help, showing up unannounced to check on me, asking our neighbors if they'd noticed anything concerning about my behavior. I'd chalked it up to misguided worry. Now, crouched behind the sanctuary pews like a criminal in my own church, I realized how naive I'd been. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Janet. "Honey, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at Rosie's Diner in 20 minutes? It's about Margaret." Janet Mitchell and I had been friends since college, and she had that sixth sense about people that I'd always envied. She was a retired social worker who'd spent 30 years dealing with family dysfunction, and her bullshit detector was legendary. If Janet wanted to meet urgently, it meant she'd discovered something I needed to know. The drive to Rosie's felt like an eternity. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, and the nausea that had been my constant companion since David's death was intensifying with each passing minute. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Food had lost all appeal months ago, and the combination of shock and hunger was making my head spin. Janet was already waiting in our usual corner booth, her expression grim. The moment I sat down, She slid a small notebook across the table. "Caroline, I've been documenting things for the past 3 weeks," she said quietly. "At first, I thought you should know that people were talking, but now I realize this is much worse than gossip." I opened the notebook with trembling fingers. Janet's neat handwriting filled page after page. March 15th. Margaret told Susan Fletcher at the grocery store that Caroline reeked of alcohol at Mom's birthday party. Asked Susan to pray for the family. March 18th. Margaret called Louise Martinez, suggested Caroline shouldn't be handling Mom's medications anymore due to impairment issues. March 22nd. Margaret met with Dr. Peterson after church, expressed concerns about Caroline's erratic behavior, and asked about addiction resources. March 25th. Margaret spoke with Tom Brady from the church board about removing Caroline from her position managing the food bank finances. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Each entry was a calculated strike against my reputation, my relationships, my purpose. Margaret wasn't just spreading rumors. She was building a comprehensive case that I was an alcoholic unfit to handle responsibilities. "There's more," Janet said softly. "My daughter Ashley works at the bank where Margaret does her business accounts." She wasn't supposed to tell me this, but last week, Margaret made some very specific inquiries about the process for having someone declared incompetent to handle their financial affairs. The diner suddenly felt like it was spinning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your sister isn't just trying to embarrass you, Caroline. She's positioning herself to take control of your finances. Think about it. David left you the house, his life insurance, his retirement savings. That's nearly $500,000. My mouth went dry. David had indeed left me comfortable, but I'd been too deep in grief to think about money as a motive for Margaret's behavior. Now pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. "The loan," I whispered. "What loan?" "Last year, when her business was failing, we loaned her $15,000. She was supposed to start paying us back in January, but she said she needed more time." Janet's expression darkened. "Caroline, if she can't pay you back, and she's facing her own financial crisis with the twins' college expenses coming up..." She didn't need to finish. I could see the ugly truth forming. Margaret needed money she didn't have, and I was sitting on a substantial inheritance while dealing with grief that made me vulnerable. If she could convince enough people that I was an alcoholic, unreliable, impaired, dangerous to myself, she could potentially gain control over my assets, or at least eliminate her debt to me. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with David, my mind racing through months of interactions with new understanding. The surprise visits where Margaret would arrive when I was still in my pajamas at noon, then comment loudly about my rough appearance to neighbors. The times she'd insisted on taking me to doctor appointments, then lingered to speak privately with the medical staff about her concerns. Even the way she'd positioned herself as my primary support system after David's death, discouraging other friends from visiting, volunteering to handle errands that would normally require me to interact with people in the community. She'd been isolating me while simultaneously building her narrative of my decline. By 3 a.m., my sheets were soaked with sweat and my stomach was churning with anxiety. I'd managed maybe 10 hours of sleep total in the past week, and food still felt impossible to swallow. The stress was manifesting in ways that probably did make me look unwell to casual observers, which had likely played right into Margaret's hands. Wednesday morning, I forced myself to shower and dress carefully before heading to my mother's house. Mom was 82 and struggling with early-stage dementia, but her lucid moments were still sharp. I needed to know if Margaret had been poisoning that relationship too. I found Mom in her garden, tending to her tomato plants with the focused intensity that had always calmed her mind. When she saw me approaching, her face lit up with genuine warmth. "Caroline! Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here. I've been so worried. Margaret keeps telling me the most concerning things about you." My heart sank. "What kinds of things, Mom?" "She says you've been drinking heavily since David passed, and that you're not taking care of yourself properly. But honey, you look thin and tired, not drunk. I know the difference. Your father had his struggles with the bottle, remember?" I sat beside her on the garden bench, feeling a mixture of relief and fury. Even with her cognitive challenges, Mom could see through Margaret's lies. "Has Margaret asked you about anything else? Maybe about David's life insurance or the house?" Mom's expression grew troubled. "Well, yes, actually. She suggested that maybe I should encourage you to move in with me, and that perhaps she could help manage our combined finances. She said it would be easier for everyone if there was just one person handling the money." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Margaret was trying to position herself as the responsible family member, managing two vulnerable women, one supposedly addicted, one with dementia. It would give her access to both Mom's modest savings and my substantial inheritance. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Pastor Williams. "Caroline, I wonder if you might have time to meet with me this week. There are some concerns that have been brought to my attention, and I'd like to discuss them with you privately." The concern in his voice was genuine, which somehow made it worse. Margaret's campaign was working. Even people who'd known me for decades were starting to question my stability. "Of course, Pastor. But may I ask what kinds of concerns?" There was a pause. "Well, several congregation members have expressed worry about your well-being since David's passing. They're wondering if you might benefit from some additional support." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling completely alone. Margaret had succeeded in making me doubt myself. Was I handling grief poorly? Did I appear unstable to people who'd known me for years? The gaslighting was so thorough that I found myself questioning my own perceptions. But what I discovered next changed everything. That evening, I couldn't sleep again. The combination of Pastor Williams' call and my conversation with Mom had left me feeling like I was drowning in Margaret's web of lies. I found myself pacing the house at 2 a.m., my hands shaking as I made yet another cup of chamomile tea I wouldn't be able to drink. I was standing in David's study, surrounded by his legal books and case files, when something caught my eye. His desk calendar was still open to the week before he died, and I noticed a notation I'd missed before. "Lunch with Margaret. Discuss C situation." My blood ran cold. David and Margaret had barely tolerated each other during our marriage. Why would they have been meeting privately? With trembling fingers, I opened David's laptop. His email was still logged in, and I felt guilty snooping, but desperation overrode propriety. I searched for Margaret's name and found the correspondence that made my world tilt on its axis. 3 weeks before David's heart attack, Margaret had emailed him. "David, I'm deeply concerned about Caroline. She's been calling me at odd hours, slurring her words. Last Sunday, she smelled like alcohol during the service. I think she's hiding a serious drinking problem from you. Can we meet to discuss?" David's response was protective, but worried. "Margaret, I haven't seen any signs of this at home, but if you're genuinely concerned, we should talk. Caroline's been stressed about her job, but I don't think she's drinking. Still, I'd rather be safe. Let's meet Tuesday." The emails continued. Margaret had been planting seeds of doubt about my mental state for weeks before David died. She'd even sent him photos, blurry, poorly lit images that she claimed showed me stumbling out of the grocery store. Looking at them now, I could see they were deliberately misleading. Shots taken at angles that made normal walking look unsteady. but David's final email to her, sent just 2 days before he died, showed he hadn't been convinced. "Margaret, I've been watching Caroline carefully, and I don't see evidence of drinking. She's tired from work stress, but she's not intoxicated. I think you may be misinterpreting what you're seeing. I'm going to talk to Caroline directly about your concerns." My chest tightened as I realized the timeline. David had planned to tell me about Margaret's allegations. But he died before he could. The next morning, I called in sick to work, the third time in 2 weeks. My supervisor, Jennifer, sounded concerned. "Caroline, I know you're grieving, but you seem really unwell lately. Are you taking care of yourself? Maybe you should consider some time off." Even at work, people were starting to notice my deterioration. Margaret's poison was spreading everywhere. I decided to visit David's best friend, Robert Chen, who was also his former law partner. Robert had been a pallbearer at the funeral and had always been straight with me. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be him. Robert's office was in the same building where David had practiced for 15 years. Sitting across from his mahogany desk, I felt David's absence like a physical wound. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did David ever mention concerns about my drinking?" Robert's eyebrows shot up. "You're drinking?" "Caroline, David never mentioned anything like that. In fact, he used to joke that you were the only person he knew who could make a single glass of wine last an entire evening." He leaned forward, studying my face. Why would you ask that?" I explained everything: Margaret's campaign, the church rumors, even the emails I'd found. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Caroline, this is deeply troubling. What your sister is doing, it's a form of psychological abuse, and if she's trying to manipulate your mother's finances—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Have you considered that she might be building a case for some kind of guardianship or conservatorship claim?" The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" "If she can establish a pattern of you being unable to care for yourself due to addiction, and your mother being vulnerable due to dementia, she could potentially petition the court to be appointed as guardian for both of you. It would give her control over all financial decisions." My hands started shaking again. Could she actually succeed? If she has enough witnesses, documentation, and your mother's condition worsens, possibly. Especially if you continue to appear unstable due to the stress she's putting you under. It's diabolical, actually. The lies are causing the very symptoms that make the lies seem credible. That afternoon, I forced myself to go to the grocery store. I needed to start eating again, needed to stop the physical deterioration that was feeding Margaret's narrative. But as I walked through the produce section, I heard familiar voices from the next aisle over. "I'm just so worried about her," Margaret was saying. "Yesterday she showed up at our mother's house looking absolutely dreadful, thin, shaky, barely coherent. Mom has dementia, so she can't really judge Caroline's condition accurately." "That's so sad," replied Nancy Peterson from church. "Grief affects everyone differently, but when it becomes addiction—" "The worst part is she's in complete denial," Margaret continued. "She actually accused me of lying about her condition. It's classic alcoholic behavior. Blame everyone else, refuse to get help. I'm just terrified about what will happen to our mother if Caroline's condition continues to deteriorate." I stood frozen behind a display of apples, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Margaret was actively recruiting witnesses, building her case in real time. But then I heard something that changed everything. "Well," Nancy said slowly, "I have to say, Margaret, I've been thinking about what you've told us. I've known Caroline for 8 years, and I've never once seen her drink anything stronger than coffee at church functions. And last month at the bake sale, she seemed completely normal. Tired from grief, certainly, but not intoxicated. Are you absolutely sure about what you're seeing? There was a pause before Margaret responded, and when she did, her voice had a sharp edge I'd never heard before. Nancy, I think I know my own sister. And I think I can tell when someone has been drinking. If you're not going to be supportive of what I'm going through, trying to help her? I'm not trying to be unsupportive, Nancy said quickly. I guess I'm having trouble reconciling the Caroline I know with what you're describing. Well, maybe you don't know her as well as you think you do. Margaret's mask was slipping. For the first time, someone was questioning her narrative, and she was getting defensive. Angry even. I waited until they left, then completed my shopping with a strange mixture of hope and terror. Nancy's doubt meant Margaret's story wasn't as bulletproof as I'd feared, but Margaret's reaction suggested she had backup plans I hadn't considered yet. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother, and she sounded confused and upset. Caroline, honey, I just had the strangest conversation with Margaret. She's insisting that you asked her to help manage my checkbook, but I don't remember you saying anything like that. And she wants me to sign some papers that would let her access my bank account. She says it's just to help me pay bills, but something doesn't feel right. My blood turned to ice. Margaret was accelerating her timeline. The room began to spin as the full scope of Margaret's plan crystallized before me. This wasn't just about destroying my reputation. She was positioning herself to control our mother's finances, while simultaneously making me appear too unstable to intervene. The alcoholism narrative wasn't the endgame. It was the setup. Mom, don't sign anything, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Tell her you need time to think about it, okay? Can you do that for me? Of course, sweetheart, but I'm so confused. Margaret says you've been having problems, that you might not be thinking clearly right now. She showed me some papers from a lawyer about something called a wellness check and guardianship options. Caroline, what's happening? My mouth went dry. Margaret had already consulted a lawyer. She was building a case for legal guardianship of our mother, using my supposed alcoholism as grounds to declare me an unfit family member. If she succeeded, she'd control not just Mom's monthly pension, but the house David and I had been paying the mortgage on for 3 years. The house worth nearly $400,000 in today's market. Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. I am not drinking. I have never had a drinking problem. Margaret is lying, and I think she's trying to take control of your money. Can you put those papers somewhere safe where she can't find them? There was a long pause. Oh, honey, that's such an awful thing to say about your sister. She's been so helpful since David passed, driving me to appointments, bringing groceries. Why would she lie? The question hit me like a physical blow because I still didn't have a complete answer. Margaret earned decent money as a dental hygienist. She wasn't destitute, but as I thought about her recent divorce, her complaints about Jim getting the house, her bitterness about having to move back into a tiny apartment, suddenly the pieces began forming a clearer picture. After Mom hung up, I sat in David's chair, staring at the wall where his diploma still hung. The headache that had been building all day exploded behind my eyes, and my hands trembled as I tried to think through my options. I needed proof of Margaret's lies, but I also needed to act fast before she convinced Mom to sign anything. I called my friend Janet, a paralegal who'd handled David's estate paperwork. Caroline, I'm so glad to hear from you, she said warmly. How are you holding up? Actually, I'm in serious trouble, and I need legal advice. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, though even to my own ears it sounded paranoid and desperate. Janet listened without interruption, then was quiet for a long moment. Caroline, this is more common than you'd think, especially when elderly parents have assets and adult children are under financial stress. The alcoholism angle is particularly clever because it's hard to disprove. If you deny it, you sound like you're in denial. If you take a drug test, she can claim you've been temporarily sober. So what do I do? First, document everything. Record conversations if your state allows it. Check the laws. Second, we need to get your mother evaluated by an independent physician to establish her mental competency before Margaret can claim she's too confused to make decisions. Third, if you have any allies in your family or community, you need to start reaching out. Margaret's counting on you being isolated. After hanging up, I realized Janet was right about isolation being Margaret's strategy. Since David's death, I'd withdrawn from most social connections, making it easier for Margaret to control the narrative about my condition. I thought about Nancy Peterson's doubts in the grocery store and made a decision that terrified me. I was going to church tomorrow. The next morning, I spent an hour getting ready, determined to look as healthy and stable as possible. I ate breakfast despite my churning stomach, applied concealer under my eyes, and chose clothes that wouldn't hang loosely on my frame. Walking into the sanctuary felt like entering a courtroom where I was already on trial. Conversations seemed to quiet as I passed, and I felt the weight of curious, pitying glances. Margaret was already there, sitting in the third row with Mom beside her. When she saw me, her face arranged itself into an expression of surprised concern. "Caroline!" she called out, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "I'm so glad you felt up to coming today. You look—" "Well, you look better than yesterday." The implication was clear to everyone listening. Yesterday, I had looked bad, presumably because I'd been drinking. It was masterfully done, expressing sisterly care while reinforcing her narrative. "I look the same as always, Margaret," I replied evenly, sitting down beside Mom, who squeezed my hand but looked confused and worried. During the service, I felt hyper-aware of every gesture, every expression, knowing that people were watching for signs of instability. When we stood for hymns, I made sure my hands didn't shake. When we bowed for prayer, I kept my eyes open, scanning the congregation, and noticed something interesting. Not everyone was buying Margaret's story. Nancy Peterson caught my eye and nodded slightly. Tom Harrison, who'd known David since high school, looked puzzled rather than pitying. And Sarah Chen, who'd brought my family countless casseroles after the funeral, seemed to be studying Margaret more than me. After the service, Margaret moved quickly to intercept anyone who might approach me, but Sarah was faster. "Caroline, you've been on my mind so much lately," she said, taking my hands in hers. "I know grief hits everyone differently, but I wanted you to know that if you need anything, and I mean anything, please call me." Her eyes held mine meaningfully, and I realized she was sending a message. She didn't believe Margaret's version of events. "Thank you, Sarah. I might take you up on that soon." Margaret appeared at my elbow immediately. "Caroline's been having such a hard time lately," she told Sarah. "I'm trying to get her connected with some resources, maybe some counseling that specializes in grief and other issues." "What other issues?" Sarah asked directly, and I saw Margaret's smile tighten slightly. "Well, it's family business, really, but Caroline knows she can talk to me about anything." As we walked toward the parking lot, Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her entire demeanor shifted, becoming almost excited. "Oh, Caroline, perfect timing. That was Dr. Martinez's office. You remember? Mom's doctor? They had a cancellation and can see her this afternoon for that evaluation we discussed. The one about her memory issues." I stopped walking. What evaluation? Mom, did you schedule an evaluation? Mom looked confused. Margaret said you thought it was a good idea because of my forgetting things lately. Margaret was moving faster than I'd anticipated. If Dr. Martinez was the same physician who'd been treating Mom for years, Margaret had probably already spoken to him about Mom's declining condition and my supposed inability to help due to my drinking problem. Actually, Mom, I think we should get a second opinion, I said. Maybe see someone who specializes in memory issues? That's not necessary, Margaret said quickly. Dr. Martinez knows Mom's history. Besides, the appointment's already scheduled, and you know how hard it is to get in to see him. That's when I realized Margaret had made a critical error. She was pushing too hard, too fast, and it was starting to show. Her mask of concerned sister was slipping into something more controlling. I think Caroline should come with us, Mom said suddenly. If we're talking about my memory, I want both my daughters there. Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, if Caroline feels up to it. I just worry about adding stress to her day. I'll be there, I said firmly. That afternoon, sitting in Dr. Martinez's waiting room, I watched Margaret whisper urgently into her phone. When she hung up, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold calculation mixed with something that looked almost like hatred. Caroline, I need to tell you something, she said quietly. I've been in touch with an intervention specialist. I think it's time we got you the help you really need. My blood turned to ice as I realized what she meant. Margaret wasn't just planning to take control of Mom's assets. She was preparing to have me committed. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. Around us, the waiting room continued its quiet hum, an elderly man reading a magazine, a mother with her teenage son, the receptionist answering phones. Normal people living normal lives, while my sister sat 3 feet away, calmly discussing having me institutionalized. An intervention specialist, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. My hands were trembling slightly, so I clasped them in my lap. For what, exactly? Caroline, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Margaret's voice carried that same patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years. I've documented everything. The missed calls when I couldn't reach you, the times you seemed confused about our conversations, the way you've been isolating yourself since Dad died. Each word was calculated, I realized. She'd been building a case against me for months, maybe longer. My throat felt tight, and I had to concentrate on breathing evenly. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly, casting everything in harsh relief. Mrs. Thompson? A nurse appeared at the desk. Dr. Martinez will see you now. As we walked down the hallway, Mom between us, I caught her looking at me with concern. Caroline, honey, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? Before I could answer, Margaret spoke up. She's been having a lot of ups and downs lately, Mom. That's part of what we need to discuss with Dr. Martinez. The casual way she twisted everything made my stomach clench. I'd barely slept in 3 days, had lost nearly 10 pounds since this nightmare began, and my hands shook every morning when I tried to drink my coffee. But those were symptoms of stress and betrayal trauma, not alcoholism. In Dr. Martinez's office, I watched Margaret perform. She had notes, actual written notes, about my concerning behaviors, my missed lunch dates, my slurred speech during phone calls, my erratic mood swings. I'm worried about both of them, Dr. Martinez, Margaret was saying. Mom's been having more memory episodes, and Caroline... She paused, glancing at me with what looked like genuine sadness. Caroline's been struggling since our father passed. I think the grief has triggered some deeper issues. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd been Mom's physician for over a decade, looked genuinely concerned. "Mrs. Thompson, have you noticed any changes in Caroline's behavior?" Mom hesitated, and in that pause, I saw exactly how Margaret's manipulation had been working. Plant enough seeds of doubt, ask enough leading questions, and even the people who love you start to question their own perceptions. "Well," Mom said slowly, "she has seemed more distant lately. And there was that time she forgot we'd made plans for lunch." "That was the day of Dad's memorial service planning meeting," I said quietly. "I was overwhelmed, not drunk." Margaret reached over and patted my hand. "Caroline, no one's saying drunk. We're talking about using alcohol to cope with grief, which is completely understandable." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost doubted myself for a moment. Then I remembered the bank statements hidden in my purse, the real reason for this elaborate performance. "Dr. Martinez," I said, "before we continue, I think you should know that Mom's finances may have been compromised. I've found some irregularities that suggest—" "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Margaret interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. "Caroline, you're seeing conspiracies everywhere. It's one of the signs I've been worried about." She turned to Dr. Martinez, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She's become paranoid, especially about money. She accused me last week of trying to steal from Mom. It's heartbreaking." The performance was flawless. Even I might have believed her if I hadn't been living the reality of it. Dr. Martinez was looking at me with the expression I'd seen before: professional concern mixed with pity. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Jensen. "Can you talk? Found something you need to see." "I need to step outside for a moment," I said, standing abruptly. In the hallway, I called Sarah back with shaking fingers. "Caroline, thank God. I did some checking after church this morning. My husband handles insurance claims, and I asked him to look into your sister's situation quietly." "What did you find?" "Margaret filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. Quietly, not many people knew. But here's the thing. She's been fighting it, claiming there were assets that weren't disclosed. Assets that rightfully belonged to her family." The pieces clicked into place with nauseating clarity. Margaret wasn't just stealing from Mom. She was positioning it as recovering money she felt entitled to. In her mind, she probably wasn't even committing a crime. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The intervention specialist she mentioned? I know him. He's legitimate, but he's also expensive and tends to work with families who want quick solutions. Caroline, if she can get you committed for evaluation, even temporarily, she'd have a much easier time getting guardianship over your mother." The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the cool surface through my blouse. "How long would that take?" "In cases involving family concerns about mental health and alleged substance abuse. Sometimes just a few days, especially if she has documentation and family testimony." When I returned to the office, Margaret was holding Mom's hand, speaking in low, concerned tones. "Just want what's best for everyone. Caroline needs help, and Mom needs protection." Dr. Martinez looked up as I entered. "Caroline, your sister has shared some concerning observations. I think it might be beneficial if we arranged for you to speak with a specialist who can help determine the best course of treatment." "What kind of specialist?" I asked, though I already knew. "Someone who handles grief counseling and related issues," Margaret said gently. "Just an evaluation, to help us understand how to support you better." The trap was closing, but Margaret had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I'd continue to be the same people-pleasing sister who'd always deferred to her judgment. She didn't realize that loss and betrayal had burned away everything except my core determination to protect Mom. I appreciate your concern, I told Dr. Martinez. But I'm going to seek a second opinion on Mom's condition first, from a geriatrician who specializes in memory issues. Margaret's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of anger that made her look like a stranger. Caroline, you're being resistant to help again. Dr. Martinez, this is exactly the kind of behavior I've been documenting. As we left the office, Margaret was already on her phone, speaking in urgent whispers. I caught fragments. Moving faster than we anticipated. And, yes, as early as tomorrow. In the parking lot, Mom took my arm. Caroline, I'm confused about all this. Are you really having problems with drinking? Looking into her worried face, I realized this was my moment of truth. I could keep trying to handle this quietly, preserve family relationships, avoid making waves, or I could fight back with everything I had. Mom, I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours. Can you do that? She searched my face, then nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Pack a small bag and come stay with me tonight. Don't tell Margaret. As I drove home with Mom beside me, my phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Caroline, I'm worried about your mental state after that outburst at Dr. Martinez's office. I've scheduled an emergency consultation for tomorrow morning. The specialist needs to evaluate you before this situation gets worse. I'll pick you up at 8. The message was no longer disguised as sisterly concern. It was an ultimatum delivered with cold efficiency. But Margaret didn't know about the bank statements in my purse, or Sarah Jensen's investigation, or the fact that I'd just convinced Mom to disappear for 24 hours. Most importantly, she didn't know that tomorrow morning at 8, when she arrived to collect me for her emergency consultation, I wouldn't be there. I would be at the courthouse, filing for emergency protective custody of my mother. The war Margaret had been fighting in shadows was about to become very, very public. Block 5. The gloves come off. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of Margaret's car in my driveway. My heart hammered as I peered through the bedroom curtains. She sat behind the wheel, engine running, staring at my house. The dashboard light illuminated her face, cold, calculating. She'd been there long enough for the windows to fog. Mom stirred in the guest bed. Caroline, what's wrong? Nothing, Mom. Go back to sleep. But my hands were shaking as I watched Margaret finally drive away. The message was clear. I know you're in there. I know what you're planning. By 5 a.m., I'd given up on sleep entirely. My stomach churned with a toxic mixture of caffeine and adrenaline as I sat at my kitchen table, spreading out documents like battle plans, bank statements, power of attorney paperwork, notes from Sarah's investigation. The courthouse didn't open until 8:30, but I needed every detail perfect. Mom shuffled into the kitchen, looking frail in her borrowed nightgown. You look terrible, honey. Thanks, Mom. That's exactly what I needed to hear. She sat beside me, studying the papers with clearer eyes than I'd seen in weeks. This is about the house, isn't it? And my money? I nodded, not trusting my voice. How much? She asked quietly. A lot. Maybe everything. The silence stretched between us. Then Mom reached over and patted my hand with fingers that felt like paper. I've been pretending to be more confused than I am. It seemed easier than fighting with Margaret all the time. My coffee cup clattered against the saucer. What? Some days are bad, yes, but other days, I just got tired of her treating me like a child, so I let her. Mom's voice carried a shame that broke my heart. I thought if I went along with it, she'd be gentler with both of us. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Margaret's name lit up the screen. "Don't answer," Mom whispered. The ringing stopped, then started again immediately. On the third call, I picked up. "Margaret, it's 5:30 in the morning. Where is she?" My sister's voice was raw, desperate. All pretense of gentle concern had evaporated. "Where is Mom?" "She's safe." "Caroline, you don't understand what you're doing. That specialist appointment isn't optional. There are procedures in place now. Legal procedures." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of procedures?" "The kind that happen when someone is deemed a danger to themselves or a vulnerable adult." Margaret's voice hardened. "I have 3 witnesses who will testify to your erratic behavior. Dr. Martinez has documented concerns about your mental state. And Mom's doctor has questions about whether you're capable of providing adequate care." "You're threatening me." "I'm protecting our mother from someone who's clearly having a breakdown." The line went dead. Mom was watching me with those newly sharp eyes. "She's going to try to have you committed, isn't she?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Then we'd better move fast." At 7 a.m., I called Sarah Jensen. She answered on the first ring, sounding wide awake. "Caroline, everything okay?" "Margaret knows we're on to her. She's trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. We need to get to the courthouse as soon as it opens." "Slow down. Tell me exactly what happened." I explained Margaret's threats, her midnight surveillance, the ominous mention of legal procedures. Sarah listened without interrupting. "Okay," she said finally. "This is actually good news." "Good news? Sarah, she's going to have me locked up." "She's panicking. People make mistakes when they panic." I could hear papers rustling. "I've been busy too. Got into those financial records you mentioned. Caroline, your sister hasn't just been skimming. She's been running a full-scale embezzlement operation through your mother's accounts." My knees went weak. "How much?" "North of $400,000 over 18 months. Fake medical bills, fraudulent care services, money transfers to accounts in her name. And here's the kicker. She's been claiming your mother as completely incapacitated for insurance purposes, while simultaneously using her signature on dozens of financial documents." I sank into a chair. "That's fraud." "Multiple felonies, actually. But Caroline, if she gets you declared incompetent and assumes guardianship of your mother, she could make this all disappear. Clean up the paper trail, claim any missing money went to care expenses, and legally prevent your mother from ever contradicting her story." The trap wasn't just closing, it was about to spring shut. "What do we do?" "We beat her to the courthouse. I'll meet you there at 8:15. Bring your mother. We're filing for an emergency protective order and requesting an immediate competency hearing. For your mother, not you." "Sarah, what if Margaret's already filed something? What if they won't listen to us?" "Then we go to the police and the district attorney and every local news station that'll take our call." Sarah's voice carried a cold satisfaction. "Your sister wants to play hardball? Game on." At 8 a.m. sharp, Margaret's car pulled into my driveway again. I watched from the kitchen window as she climbed out, straightening her jacket like armor. She looked perfectly composed, professional, righteous. Behind her, a second car arrived. A man in a suit I didn't recognize. Mom appeared at my shoulder. "Who's that?" "I don't know, but I'm betting he's not here to help us." Margaret rang the doorbell once, then began pounding on the door. "Caroline, I know you're in there. This doesn't have to be difficult." I grabbed the envelope containing all our evidence and Mom's hastily packed bag. "Back door, now." We slipped out through my rear yard like fugitives, which I supposed we were. My hands shook so badly I could barely start the car. As we pulled out of the alley behind my house, I saw Margaret's silhouette in my front window. She'd let herself in. "She has a key to your house?" Mom asked. "Emergency key, under the fake rock." I felt violated in a way that went deeper than simple trespassing. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Caroline, you're making this so much worse for yourself. Come home. We can still handle this privately." I showed the message to Mom, who shook her head grimly. 47 years old, and she still sounds like she did when we caught her stealing from your piggy bank. "We can work this out, Mom. Don't tell Dad." "Margaret stole from me?" $20 bill you'd been saving for months. She spent it on makeup and then tried to convince us you'd lost it. Mom's voice carried decades of accumulated disappointments. I should have seen this coming. As we drove toward the courthouse, I spotted Margaret's car in my rearview mirror, following at a careful distance. "She's behind us," I told Mom. "Good. Let her watch us fight back." But my confidence wavered as we pulled into the courthouse parking lot. Margaret parked 3 spaces away, and I could see her on her phone, speaking urgently. The man from the second car appeared at her window. They conferred like generals planning a siege. Sarah Jensen met us at the courthouse steps, looking like a warrior in her crisp business suit. "You ready for this?" "No," I admitted. "But let's do it anyway." As we climbed the steps toward the entrance, Margaret called out behind us, "Caroline, stop right there." We kept walking. "I'm trying to save your life." Her voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. "You're sick, and you're dragging Mom down with you." At the courthouse door, I finally turned around. Margaret stood at the bottom of the steps, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, she was just my big sister again, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd held me during thunderstorms. "Margaret," I called down to her, "it's not too late to stop this." Something flickered across her face, hope, maybe, or relief. Then the man in the suit whispered something in her ear, and her expression hardened back into cold determination. "Yes, it is," she called back. "You made sure of that." As we entered the courthouse, Sarah leaned close to my ear. "Whatever happens in there, don't let them separate you from your mother. And Caroline, that man with your sister, he's not a doctor. He's a lawyer." The courthouse doors closed behind us with a sound like a vault sealing shut. Outside, Margaret was already climbing the steps, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking to someone with the urgent intensity of a person whose entire world was about to collapse. The real war was about to begin. The courthouse fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps as Sarah led us through a maze of corridors. My stomach had been empty since yesterday, but the thought of food made me nauseous. Everything felt surreal. The click of our heels on polished floors, the weight of the folder containing my financial records, the way Mom kept glancing back as if Margaret might materialize behind us. "First things first," Sarah said, stopping at a bank of phones. "We need to document everything before they can destroy evidence." She handed me a legal pad. "Write down every conversation you can remember, dates, times, witnesses. Your sister's been planning this for months, Caroline. People don't just wake up one morning and decide to have their siblings committed." My hand trembled as I wrote. March 15th. Margaret asked about my finances after Dad's funeral, said she was worried about me managing alone. The pen felt impossibly heavy. "She was fishing," Mom said, reading over my shoulder. "Testing how much you knew about the estate." April the 2nd. Margaret offered to help with my bills, insisted on seeing my bank statements. April 20th. Margaret asked Pastor Williams about intervention resources for struggling family members. The memories clicked into place like puzzle pieces, each one more damning than the last. How had I missed it? The constant questions about my social life, or lack thereof. The way she'd started showing up unannounced, always with her phone out, always asking leading questions. She was building a case, I whispered. And documenting it, Sarah confirmed. The question is, what was her endgame? Conservatorship? Power of attorney? Or something bigger? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Dr. Bradley Hendricks from Valley Mental Health Services. Your sister has scheduled an intake appointment for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please call to confirm. I showed the message to Sarah, whose jaw tightened. Voluntary commitment papers. If you show up to that appointment and sign anything, she wins. But I'm not going to show up. Doesn't matter, she'll tell them you refused treatment, that you're a danger to yourself and others. Then she petitions for involuntary commitment. Sarah's voice was clinical, but her eyes blazed with anger. It's textbook psychological abuse. Create the crisis, offer the solution, then punish the victim for resisting. Mom sank into a nearby chair, looking every one of her 72 years. How did I raise a child capable of this? The guilt in her voice broke my heart. I knelt beside her chair. You didn't raise her to be this way, Mom. She chose this. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was entirely true. Margaret had always been the golden child. Straight A's, perfect attendance, teacher's pet. When she didn't get what she wanted, she found ways to make it everyone else's fault. The stolen $20 Mom had mentioned was just the beginning. Margaret had perfected the art of being the victim in every scenario she created. We need more than just your testimony, Sarah said. We need proof of her lies. That's when I remembered. The church's digital archives. Pastor Williams recorded every service, every meeting. If Margaret had been spreading her poison during church functions, there might be audio evidence. The church records everything, I told Sarah. Board meetings, counseling sessions, even coffee hour conversations when they're testing the new sound system. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Can you access those recordings? Mrs. Henderson runs the media ministry. She's been fighting with Margaret for months about the music budget. I pulled out my phone. If anyone would help us expose Margaret's lies, it's her. The call connected on the second ring. Caroline, honey, I was just thinking about you. That sister of yours has been... Mrs. Henderson, I need your help. It's about Margaret's accusations. A long pause. Are you somewhere we can talk privately? 20 minutes later, we sat in Sarah's BMW outside Covenant Methodist, waiting for Mrs. Henderson to arrive with a flash drive. She'd been more than willing to help once she learned the truth. Apparently, Margaret's campaign against me had included demanding that Mrs. Henderson be removed from her position for enabling my destructive behavior by not reporting my alleged drinking during church events. She tried to get me fired, Mrs. Henderson had said. For not tattling on problems that don't exist? That girl's been poisoned since high school. My phone rang, Margaret calling for the 8th time in an hour. This time, I answered. Caroline, thank God. Where are you? We need to talk. About what, Margaret? About the fake doctor's appointment you scheduled for me? About the lies you've been spreading for months? Silence. Then, I don't know what you think you know, but you're making a mistake. A big one. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Fine. Her voice turned cold. If you want to do this the hard way, that's your choice. But remember, I tried to help you first. The line went dead. Sarah was watching me carefully. How do you feel? Terrified, angry, betrayed. I thought about it. But also, clear. For the first time in months, I feel like I can see clearly. Mrs. Henderson's Honda pulled up beside us. Through the window, she held up a small flash drive like a trophy. As Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. The nausea was gone. The crushing weight of confusion that had been suffocating me for months was lifting, replaced by something sharp and focused. Righteous anger. Caroline, Sarah said softly, staring at her laptop screen. You need to hear this. The audio quality was church basement poor, but Margaret's voice came through clearly. She's been hiding it for months. Empty bottles in her purse, showing up drunk to family dinners. Yesterday, she was so intoxicated she couldn't remember our father's middle name. A murmur of concerned voices. Then Margaret again. I'm scared she's going to hurt herself. Or worse, hurt our mother. Caroline has always been unstable. But since Dad's death, she's been spiraling. I think she blames Mom for something. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just trying to have me committed. She was setting Mom up as Margaret's next victim. There's more, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. 6 hours of recordings. She's been building this story since your father's funeral, Caroline. And she's been promising people that once she gets you help, she'll make sure the church gets a generous donation from your father's estate. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Margaret wasn't just after control. She was after the inheritance. All of it. With me declared incompetent and Mom painted as an enabling victim, Margaret would become our family's sole decision-maker. Sarah was already on her phone with someone official-sounding, discussing restraining orders and evidence preservation. But I was thinking bigger. Margaret had made one crucial mistake in her months of careful planning. She'd underestimated me. She'd seen the quiet, accommodating little sister she'd been manipulating for decades. She hadn't expected me to fight back. My phone buzzed with a text from Pastor Williams. Caroline, I think we need to talk. Margaret has made some serious allegations, but after today's conversation with Mrs. Henderson, I'm beginning to have concerns about the source of these claims. Can you meet me at the church tonight at 8 p.m.? I showed the text to Sarah and Mom. It's a trap, Mom said immediately. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe it's an opportunity. Because I'd just realized something. If Margaret had been recording me secretly for months, building her case, then she'd kept evidence of her own lies. Evidence that could destroy her completely. And I was going to find it. But as we sat in that parking lot, making plans that felt more like plotting a war than saving a family, Margaret's car pulled slowly past the church entrance. She'd been watching us the entire time. My phone rang again. Margaret's voice was different now. Desperate, dangerous. You have no idea what you're playing with, Caroline. What I'm trying to protect you from. Meet me tonight, alone, or I make one phone call and you disappear into the system forever. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just declared war on someone far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. That night, my hands shook as I applied concealer under my eyes. The sleepless nights were showing. Dark circles that made me look like the unstable woman Margaret had been describing to everyone. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, but determined. 3 cups of coffee hadn't touched the exhaustion, but they'd sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. Sarah had wanted to come with me, but this confrontation needed to happen alone. Margaret would never reveal her true plans with witnesses around. I'd agreed to meet her at the church, but on my terms, Pastor Williams would be there too, along with Mrs. Henderson and her recordings. Walking into that sanctuary felt like entering a courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant, prosecutor, and key witness. Margaret sat in the front pew, her posture perfect as always, but I caught the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped her purse. Pastor Williams stood near the altar, his usually warm demeanor replaced by the careful neutrality of someone navigating dangerous waters. "Carolyn?" Margaret's voice carried that familiar note of condescending concern. "I'm so glad you came. We need to discuss getting you the help you need." "The help I need," I repeated slowly. "Or the help you need me to have?" Mrs. Henderson emerged from the side office, laptop in hand. "Pastor Williams, shall I play the recordings now?" Margaret's composure cracked just enough for me to see the panic underneath. "What recordings? Caroline, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior." "Margaret Elizabeth Thornton." Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the sanctuary like judgment itself. "Would you like to hear yourself promising the missions committee a $50,000 donation from your father's estate once you gained control of Caroline's affairs? Because I have that conversation from last Tuesday." The silence stretched like a held breath. Margaret's face cycled through expressions: surprise, calculation, then something cold and desperate I'd never seen before. "You don't understand," she said, standing slowly. "Caroline has been having episodes, blackouts. She called me last week screaming about seeing Dad in her kitchen. She doesn't remember, but I have the voicemail." "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "You called me, Margaret, at 2 a.m., drunk, crying about how Dad loved me more and how you were going to make me pay for it." Pastor Williams stepped forward. "Ladies, perhaps we should—" "Show him the medication," Margaret said suddenly, her voice taking on a manic edge. "Check her purse, Pastor. She's been taking antipsychotics. Why would someone take those unless—" My stomach dropped. How did she know about the sleep aids Dr. Martinez had prescribed? "Unless—" "You went through my house," I breathed. "When I was at work. You still have Dad's key." Margaret's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I was worried about you, Caroline. And what I found? Well, it confirmed everything I suspected. The pills, the empty wine bottles I had to had to clean up, the journal entries about wanting to hurt Mom." "What journal entries?" My voice was barely a whisper. She pulled out a small leather notebook, my handwriting, but words I'd never written, pages of increasingly erratic entries describing blackouts, violent thoughts, hatred for our mother. Mrs. Henderson moved closer. "Margaret, did you just say you planted wine bottles?" The slip hung in the air between us. Margaret realized her mistake too late, her face flushing. "I misspoke. The stress of watching my sister destroy herself—" "Play recording number 12, Mrs. Henderson told Pastor Williams quietly. Margaret's voice filled the sanctuary. The journal was harder to forge than I expected. Caroline's handwriting is so neat, making it look unstable took practice. But combined with the staged photos and the witness statements I've been collecting, it should be enough for a psychiatric hold. The world seemed to tilt. Margaret had been planning this for months, not just lies to the congregation, but forged evidence, staged scenes, a complete psychological warfare campaign designed to erase me from my own life. "You're sick," I whispered. "I'm practical," Margaret snapped, all pretense finally abandoned. "Do you know what people like you do to families like ours? Dad always made excuses for your selfishness, your need for attention. Mom won't live forever, Caroline. Someone has to protect what matters. And what matters is the money. What matters is maintaining the family legacy, not letting it be squandered on your therapy sessions and your little creative dreams and your complete inability to make responsible decisions. There it was, 30 years of resentment distilled into pure venom. I'd spent so long thinking Margaret was the successful one, the responsible one, never realizing she saw every kindness our parents had shown me as something stolen from her. Pastor Williams was speaking quietly into his phone. I caught fragments. Police. Forged documents. Elder abuse investigation. Margaret heard it too. Her mask finally slipped completely. "You think you've won something here?" She laughed, but it sounded brittle, desperate. "I've been talking to people for months, Caroline, building a case. Your boss knows about your drinking problem. Your neighbors have seen you stumbling home drunk. Dr. Martinez has concerns about your mental state that I helped shape. Even if these recordings prove I lied to the church, it won't undo everything else." The scope of her manipulation hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just been targeting me. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, my credibility with everyone who mattered. "But here's what you don't know," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than screaming. "Mom's been forgetting things, little things. And I've been there for every doctor's appointment, every conversation about her future care needs. Guess who she's been talking to about updating her power of attorney?" My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Caroline, get out now. I'm at your house with Mom. Someone's been here. It's bad." Margaret saw my face change and smiled. "I told you to meet me alone." The sanctuary's heavy doors creaked open. 2 men I didn't recognize stepped inside, moving with the careful purpose of people accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Margaret," Pastor Williams said sharply, "what is this?" "Crisis intervention specialists," she replied calmly. "For Caroline's safety. I have documentation showing she's a danger to herself and others. They're here to provide transport to a facility where she can get proper evaluation and treatment." I backed toward the altar, my heart hammering. "Those aren't medical professionals. Who are they?" One of the men spoke with practiced authority. "Ms. Thornton, we're here to help. If you come with us voluntarily, this will be much easier for everyone involved." Mrs. Henderson stepped protectively closer to me. "Pastor, call 911. This is kidnapping." "This is intervention," Margaret corrected. "And it's legal. I have a signed psychiatric evaluation order and a transport authorization. Caroline needs help, and she's proven she won't get it voluntarily." My phone rang again, Sarah's number. Margaret nodded to one of the men, who moved to block my path to the door. "Answer it," Margaret said sweetly. "Let Sarah hear you getting the help you need." But as I looked at my sister's face, triumphant, calculating, empty of anything resembling love, I realized something that changed everything. She'd made one final fatal mistake. The recordings Mrs. Henderson had played weren't the only evidence being gathered tonight. And the crisis intervention specialists Margaret had hired weren't the only ones who'd been watching this church. Outside, I could hear sirens approaching. Margaret heard them too. Her expression shifted from triumph to confusion to something approaching panic. "What did you do?" she whispered. I smiled for the first time in months. "I called the FBI, Margaret, because staging evidence to have someone falsely committed isn't just illegal. It's a federal crime when it involves inheritance fraud." The sanctuary doors burst open, but it wasn't more of Margaret's people. It was Detective Morrison and 3 federal agents, and they weren't here for me. Block 8. "Actually," Detective Morrison said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we've been monitoring this situation for 3 weeks. The inheritance fraud investigation Margaret triggered when she tried to have Caroline's mother's assets moved into a conservatorship under false pretenses. My legs nearly gave out. Mrs. Henderson's hand found my elbow, steadying me as the full scope of what had been happening crashed over me like a tsunami. The federal wire fraud charges came into play when we discovered the fabricated medical records. Agent Chen continued, her eyes never leaving Margaret's face. Records that were transmitted across state lines to establish grounds for involuntary commitment. Margaret's hired men were already backing toward the side exit, but 2 more agents materialized from the shadows, blocking their path. The sanctuary that had felt like a trap moments before suddenly felt like salvation. "I don't understand," Pastor Williams stammered, his face gray with shock. "Margaret, what is this about?" But Margaret wasn't looking at him. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Raw, undiluted hatred stripped of all pretense. "You called them," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Your own sister." "My sister died years ago," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I don't know who you are, but you're not her." The truth of those words hit me like a physical release. The Margaret I'd loved, defended, made excuses for. She'd been gone for so long I couldn't even pinpoint when I'd lost her. Maybe she'd never existed at all. Agent Chen stepped forward. "Caroline, we need you to know. Your mother is safe. We have officers with her at the assisted living facility. The people Margaret sent there earlier tonight have been detained." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mom's number. With shaking hands, I answered. "Caroline?" Mom's voice was clearer than it had been in months. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I've been so confused, and Margaret kept telling me you were sick, that you needed help. But these nice officers showed me the papers she wanted me to sign, and... Oh, sweetheart, I never would have given her power of attorney if I'd understood what she was planning." The sanctuary was spinning around me. I sank into the front pew, the phone pressed to my ear like a lifeline. "Mom, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. But Caroline, there's something else. She's been giving me extra pills, making me more confused. The doctor here ran some tests and found medications I was never prescribed. She's been poisoning me." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Even Detective Morrison looked shaken. Mrs. Henderson made a sound like she'd been punched. "Dear God." I looked at Margaret, this stranger wearing my sister's face, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The grief I'd been carrying, grief for our lost relationship, for the sister I'd thought she was, crystallized into something harder, cleaner, acceptance. "How long?" I asked her quietly while the agents conferred, and Pastor Williams called for an ambulance for Mom. "How long have you been planning this?" Margaret's composure cracked completely. "Planning what? Trying to save this family from your weakness? Trying to make sure Mom's money doesn't get wasted on your problems?" "There are no problems," Agent Chen interjected. "We've been investigating Caroline's finances, employment records, medical history. There's no evidence of substance abuse, no evidence of the behavioral issues documented in the fabricated reports Margaret submitted to the court." "She's manipulative," Margaret spat. "She's always been manipulative. Ask anyone?" "We did ask," Detective Morrison said grimly. "Starting with Caroline's actual friends and colleagues, not the people you coached, the real picture is very different from the one you painted." Sarah burst through the sanctuary doors, her face wild with panic. "Caroline, I've been calling and calling—" She stopped short, taking in the scene. The federal agents, Margaret in handcuffs, me sitting in the pew, looking like I'd been hit by a train. "It's over," I told her, and meant it. "It's finally over." But even as I said the words, I caught the look Margaret exchanged with one of her hired men before the agents led him away. It was subtle, quick, but unmistakable. This wasn't over. They had a backup plan. And suddenly, I understood why Sarah had rushed here looking terrified, why she'd been trying to call me so frantically. "Sarah," I said urgently, "what happened at my house?" "What did you find?" She glanced nervously at the agents, then back at me. "Caroline, we need to talk. Privately. There's something they planted there, something that's going to surface tomorrow morning, no matter what happens here tonight." Margaret smiled from behind the handcuffs. The final trap was already in motion. The sanctuary felt like it was closing in around us. My chest tightened as Sarah's words sank in. Whatever Margaret had planted at my house would surface tomorrow regardless of tonight's arrests. The familiar taste of copper filled my mouth as I bit down on my tongue, trying to process this final betrayal. "What kind of something?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands were trembling again, and I clasped them together to stop the shaking. Agent Chen stepped closer. "Miss Hartley, whatever information you have needs to be shared now. Withholding evidence in a federal investigation—" "It's not evidence," Sarah interrupted, her face flushed. "It's planted evidence. I went to water Caroline's plants like I always do when she's out of town, and I found—" She glanced at Margaret, then back at me. "Bottles, hidden in your bedroom closet, behind the winter coats. Expensive vodka, some already opened and poured out to look used. And there were other things. Pills scattered on your bathroom floor like you'd dropped them. A fake suicide note in your handwriting. Margaret must have copied it from something." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the pew so hard my knuckles went white. "My handwriting?" "She probably traced it from your letters to your mother," Detective Morrison said grimly. "We've seen this before. The alcoholism narrative wasn't working fast enough, so she escalated to making it look like you were suicidal. Tomorrow morning, she probably planned to discover you in distress and have you committed for psychiatric evaluation." Pastor Williams had gone completely pale. "Margaret, how could you do this to your own family?" But Margaret wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so cold. "You never understood, Caroline. You were always Dad's favorite. Always the smart one, the successful one. Even when you weren't perfect, everyone still loved you more." The raw honesty in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Mom's money. It was about decades of perceived slights, of feeling like she was living in my shadow. "So you decided to destroy me?" I asked, and my voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "I decided to level the playing field." Mrs. Henderson had been silent through most of this, but now she stood up from her pew with the slow dignity of someone who'd seen too much. "Margaret Elizabeth Hartley," she said, using Margaret's full name like she had when we were children caught misbehaving. "Your father would be ashamed." For the first time since this nightmare began, Margaret flinched. Agent Chen was already on her radio, dispatching a team to my house. "We'll need you to come with us, Miss Hartley, to walk through what's been planted. And we'll need a handwriting expert to examine that note." But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was remembering something from years ago. Margaret at Dad's funeral, standing apart from the mourners, watching as person after person came to offer me condolences. I'd been so lost in my own grief that I hadn't noticed her isolation. I'd assumed she was handling things better than I was. Maybe she wasn't handling things at all. You could have talked to me, I said to her. About feeling overlooked, about Dad, about anything. We're sisters. We're sisters, she corrected. Before you became the golden child who could do no wrong? Sarah put a protective arm around my shoulders. Caroline, this isn't your fault. You can't blame yourself for her choices. But part of me wondered if I could have seen this coming. The signs had been there. Margaret's increasing bitterness at family gatherings, her comments about my career, the way she'd taken over Mom's care so completely that she'd effectively shut me out. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom's hospital. Your mother is asking for you. The doctors say she's doing much better now that we've identified the foreign substances in her system. The foreign substances. Margaret had been slowly poisoning our mother to make her more compliant, more confused, more likely to sign papers she didn't understand. The magnitude of it made my knees weak. I need to get to the hospital, I told Agent Chen. We'll escort you there after we secure the scene at your house. But Miss Hartley, there's something else you need to know. She glanced at her partner, who nodded. We've been monitoring Margaret's communications for the past week. She's been in contact with someone else. Someone who helped finance this operation. My blood went cold. Who? We're still investigating, but the financial trail suggests someone with significant resources and a personal interest in your downfall. Someone who knows you well enough to understand exactly how to hurt you. Margaret's smile returned, even with her hands cuffed behind her back. You think this was just about Mom's money? Caroline, you're so naive. You made an enemy a long time ago, and they never forgot. What enemy? I demanded. What are you talking about? But the agents were already leading Margaret toward the exit. She paused at the sanctuary doors and looked back at me one last time. Remember David Morrison from college? Remember how you testified against him in that sexual assault case? Remember how you cost him his scholarship, his future, his reputation? My stomach dropped through the floor. David Morrison, not the detective, but my college classmate who'd assaulted Sarah's roommate freshman year. The case where I'd been the key witness. The case that had sent him to prison for 3 years and effectively ended his promising pre-law career. He got out 2 years ago, Margaret continued as the agents tried to pull her away. And he's been very patient, very thorough in his planning. You think tonight ends this? Caroline, this is just the beginning. The sanctuary doors slammed shut behind them, leaving me alone with Sarah, Pastor Williams, Mrs. Henderson, and the horrifying realization that Margaret had been just the visible part of an elaborate revenge plot. Someone with a much deeper grudge was still out there, and now they knew their first plan had failed. 3 months later, I stood in the courthouse steps, breathing freely for the first time in what felt like years. The verdict had been swift and decisive. Margaret, 5 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. David Morrison, 8 years for orchestrating the scheme, violating his parole, and cyberstalking. His accomplice, a private investigator he'd hired to surveil me, received 2 years and lost his license permanently. The physical evidence had been overwhelming. David's financial records showed payments to the PI, to Margaret, even to someone who'd created fake social media accounts to spread the alcoholism rumors online. They'd documented my routines, my relationships, my vulnerabilities. The planning went back 18 months. How are you really doing? Sarah asked, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward my car. I considered the question seriously. The panic attacks had mostly stopped, though I still woke up sometimes checking the locks on my doors. The tremor in my hands was gone. I'd gained back the 15 pounds I'd lost during the worst of it. I'm different. I said honestly. I used to think I could trust my instincts about people completely. Now I know that's naive, but I also know I'm stronger than I thought. Mom was home now, in her right mind, horrified by what Margaret had done to her. The doctors said the cognitive effects would fade completely within another month. We'd started family therapy together, something I never would have considered before all this. The hardest part, I continued, was accepting that Margaret's resentment was real, even if her methods were unforgivable. I did get more attention growing up. I did have advantages she didn't. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it helped me understand how David found such a willing accomplice. Detective Hayes, the real one who'd worked Margaret's case, had explained how sophisticated the manipulation had been. David had spent months cultivating Margaret's existing grievances, feeding her resentment, making her feel like she was finally getting justice instead of committing crimes. Classic radicalization tactics, he'd told me. He found someone with legitimate feelings of being wronged and slowly convinced her that extreme actions were justified. Pastor Williams appeared beside us, looking older but wiser than he had 3 months ago. The congregation had rallied around me once the truth came out, but he'd struggled with his own guilt. "I've been thinking about what you said about spiritual discernment," he told me. "How we can pray for wisdom, but still need to verify claims with evidence. I'm actually planning a sermon series about it, Trust but Verify, Faith and Common Sense." I smiled. I'd like to hear that. Mrs. Henderson had become an unexpected ally. She'd been one of the most vocal in demanding accountability from church leadership about how quickly they'd believed Margaret's lies. Her guilt over spreading rumors had transformed into fierce advocacy for others facing false accusations. But the biggest change was in how I approached my own life. I'd started seeing a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family drama. It was psychological warfare designed to isolate me from my support systems and destroy my reputation. "The goal of this kind of campaign," she'd explained, "is to make you doubt your own reality. They want you questioning everything: your memories, your perceptions, your worth. Recovery means rebuilding trust in yourself." That rebuilding was ongoing work. I'd learned to document things more carefully. I'd installed security cameras at home, not from paranoia, but from empowerment. I'd gotten better at setting boundaries, even with well-meaning people who wanted to help by sharing gossip or unsolicited advice. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between healthy caution and trauma-based hypervigilance. 3 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a support group for people who'd experienced false accusations. Looking at the faces around the circle, a teacher falsely accused of inappropriate conduct, a father fighting fabricated abuse claims, a business owner whose competitor had spread financial rumors, I saw my own journey reflected back. "The first thing I want you to know," I began, "is that your instinct to defend yourself is normal, but it's not always effective. When someone launches a smear campaign against you, your natural response is to explain, to justify, to prove your innocence. But that can actually make you look more guilty to people who don't know you well." A woman named Janet raised her hand. "So, what do you do instead?" "Document everything. Screenshot every social media post, save every email, record dates and times of conversations." I kept a daily journal during the worst of it, noting my activities, my emotional state, who I talked to. That documentation became crucial evidence. "But emotionally," asked Marcus, the falsely accused teacher, "how do you handle the isolation? When people you trusted turn against you?" I took a breath, remembering those dark weeks when even walking into a grocery store felt like running a gauntlet of whispers and stares. You have to build a smaller circle of people you can absolutely trust, and you have to accept that some relationships won't survive this. Not because you did anything wrong, but because some people are more comfortable believing drama than investigating truth. I shared what Dr. Martinez had taught me about the difference between supporters, allies, and fair-weather friends. Supporters believe you automatically. Allies listen to evidence and make reasoned judgments. Fair-weather friends abandon you the moment supporting you becomes inconvenient. The people who matter will wait for facts, I continued. The people who don't wait for facts don't actually matter, even if you thought they did. A man named Robert spoke up. What about forgiveness? Everyone keeps telling me I need to forgive and move on, but I'm still angry. This was the question I'd struggled with most in therapy. Forgiveness isn't a light switch you flip, I said. And it doesn't mean reconciliation or pretending what happened was okay. Margaret is still my sister, and somewhere under all that resentment and manipulation, I still love her. But I'll never trust her again. Those are two different things. I'd written Margaret one letter during her trial, not to forgive her, but to tell her that I hoped she'd get the mental health help she clearly needed. She hadn't responded, and I didn't expect her to. The forgiveness I've focused on, I continued, is forgiving myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for trusting people who didn't deserve it, for being naive about how cruel people can be when they feel wronged. After the meeting, several people stayed to talk privately. Janet pulled me aside. How do you trust new people now? I feel like everyone could be lying. It was a question I still worked on daily. I trust differently, I admitted. I listen more carefully to what people say about others when they think no one important is listening. I pay attention to how they treat service workers, how they talk about their exes, whether their stories stay consistent over time. I'd learned that character reveals itself in small moments, how someone responds when corrected, whether they gossip about mutual friends, if they respect boundaries when you say no. But I also refused to let their betrayal turn me into someone suspicious and closed off. I added, that would mean they won, even from prison. The drive home gave me time to reflect on how much had changed. My job performance had actually improved after the crisis passed. Having survived something genuinely terrible, normal work stress felt manageable by comparison. I'd gotten a promotion 6 weeks after Margaret's sentencing. My relationship with Mom had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Shared trauma, handled well, could apparently strengthen bonds just as easily as it could break them. I'd even started dating again, carefully, with clear communication about my recent experiences, but without the desperate need for validation that had characterized some of my previous relationships. That evening, I sat down to write a blog post that had been requested by several people who'd heard about my story. 5 red flags I wish I'd recognized earlier. A guide to identifying manipulation campaigns. 1. Isolation tactics. Margaret had subtly discouraged me from visiting Mom alone, always inserting herself as a necessary intermediary. Real caregivers encourage family involvement. Controllers limit it. 2. Information gatekeeping. She'd been the sole source of information about Mom's condition, and I'd accepted that arrangement too readily. Always verify important information through multiple sources. 3. Escalating boundary violations. The spare key, the surprise visits, the monitoring of my schedule. These weren't expressions of care, they were reconnaissance. Trust your discomfort when someone consistently pushes past boundaries you've set. 4. Triangulation. Margaret never criticized me directly to my face until the very end. Instead, she'd make comments to mom, to church friends, to neighbors, then report back their concern about me. This created drama while keeping her hands seemingly clean. 5. Rapid reputation damage. When someone's reputation changes overnight, based on dramatic but unverifiable claims, ask questions. Real problems develop gradually and usually have multiple witnesses to concerning behavior. I ended the post with a direct message to my readers. If you're currently experiencing false accusations or a smear campaign, please know that you're not alone. Document everything, build your support network carefully, and don't let anyone rush you toward forgiveness or moving on before you've processed the trauma and rebuilt your sense of safety. The people who believe lies about you without investigation were never really in your corner to begin with. The people who matter will wait for truth. You are stronger than you know, and you will survive this. But you don't have to be grateful for the learning experience. Some lessons come at too high a price, and it's okay to be angry about that while you heal. The comments started coming within hours. Stories from people who'd survived workplace bullying, family scapegoating, community ostracism, online harassment campaigns. Each comment reminded me why speaking up mattered, even when it felt vulnerable. One comment particularly stood out. My brother did something similar to me 5 years ago. I'm still working on trusting people again, but your story gives me hope that I can find that balance between wisdom and openness. Thank you for sharing. I sat back in my chair, looking around my living room, the same space where I'd had panic attacks 3 months ago, now transformed back into a sanctuary instead of a prison. Margaret and David had wanted to destroy me. Instead, they'd revealed strengths I didn't know I had and clarified what really mattered in my life. I picked up my phone and recorded a short video for my social media. 3 months ago, I was in the fight of my life against people who wanted to destroy my reputation and relationships through lies and manipulation. Today, I'm stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who proved they truly cared about me by waiting for truth instead of rushing to judgment. I paused, thinking about the viewers who might be in their own dark moments. If you're dealing with false accusations, family betrayal, or systematic attempts to isolate you from your support systems, please hear this. You are not responsible for other people's choices to lie about you. You cannot control who believes lies, but you can control how you respond. Document everything, trust carefully, but don't stop trusting entirely. And remember that surviving this kind of betrayal makes you incredibly resilient. I looked directly into the camera. The truth doesn't always win quickly, but it usually wins eventually. Hold on to that hope and hold on to your integrity. Both will serve you well. As I posted the video, my phone rang. Sarah. Dinner tomorrow night? She asked. Mom wants to cook for us. She's been practicing her old recipes, trying to remember who she was before Margaret started drugging her. I'll be there, I said, and meant it completely. Some stories end with perfect justice and complete healing. This one ended with something better. Hard-won wisdom, carefully rebuilt trust, and the knowledge that I could survive almost anything. Margaret might get out of prison in 3 years with good behavior. David Morrison wouldn't be eligible for parole for 6. But I wasn't waiting for their sentences to end before I started living my life again. I was already free. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Have you ever dealt with false accusations or family betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else who's struggling. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and you're not alone.